After working for 6 months, a group of offshore drilling crew members were preparing to return to the mainland for a vacation when an unprecedented disaster struck. The oil pipeline on the drilling platform inexplicably exploded. Upon realizing the severity of the situation, the person in charge, Magnus, immediately dispatched workers to the site of the explosion for repairs. At that moment, the employees were already wearing life jackets, ready to board a plane and reunite with their families. Just as the group was chatting and laughing, they suddenly received news that their vacation was cancelled, and they had to return to their posts. Reluctantly, the group took off their life jackets and resumed the tedious and boring repair work. As Hutton reminded the team members to stay safe, the drilling platform suddenly began to shake violently. Frightened, the group quickly grabbed the nearest handrails to steady themselves. Immediately afterward, a large area of mysterious dense fog appeared on the sea surface, surrounding the entire drilling platform. Hutton thought it was just ordinary smog, so he didn't pay much attention and continued to send workers to the explosion site for repairs. However, as one man was crawling halfway, he suddenly realized that his teammate behind him had vanished. He frantically called out his teammate's name but received no response. While the man was in a panic, a seagull suddenly appeared in front of him. Fortunately, the man was wearing a safety harness. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. At this moment, his teammates rushed up from below. They quickly reached the explosion site and started repairing the oil pipeline. While they were working on the repairs, Rose in the control room sensed something was terribly wrong. The system showed that the connection pipeline between the mainland and the drilling platform had lost pressure. This also meant that all communication equipment was inoperable. Just as Rose was about to inform Magnus of the situation, the two workers who were just repairing the pipeline suddenly fell from a height of hundreds of meters. Magnus reacted by picking up the injured and calling for an in-house doctor. Fortunately, the medical staff responded in time, pulling the injured workers back from the brink of death. Seeing that Baz was not seriously hurt, Magnus and his team finally breathed a sigh of relief. Afterwards, Rose informed Magnus that they had lost contact with headquarters. The computer displayed that the entire sea area's oil pipelines had been completely severed from the mainland. This likely meant they had been abandoned by the mainland, left to fend for themselves. While they were at their wits' end, the injured Baz suddenly woke up from his coma, his mind flashing with images of undersea fissures and the drilling platform explosion. At the same time, after learning they had been abandoned by the mainland, Hutton gathered all his teammates on the deck, preparing to find another way out. They should have been boarding a plane to go home and reunite with their families, but by a twist of fate, they were kept here by Magnus, and just now, they received news that they had been abandoned by the mainland, so they had to take action.
You said you had to.
Seeing the situation growing more chaotic, Magnus had no choice but to reveal the truth to everyone. It turned out that he had received a decommissioning notice from headquarters as early as last week. The reason he hadn't announced it was because he was afraid they wouldn't be able to handle the reality all at once. But now, they were all in the same boat, and there was no need to keep it a secret anymore. As Magnus finished speaking, countless ashes suddenly fell from the sky, as if something had been completely burned away. While the group was at a loss, the injured Baz suddenly appeared on the deck. He kept muttering that it was too late.
So late. It's already started. Cut.
The doctor thought Baz was hallucinating due to his severe injuries, so he took him to the operating room and gave him a sedative shot. Just as the needle was about to touch Baz, he suddenly became agitated and broke free from the restraints, continuously claiming that disaster was imminent.
Oh, you're not listening! There's something out there! It's coming!
Inside the drilling platform, Magnus was anxiously hoping that headquarters would send someone for rescue. Lek, who was in charge of communications, took out a marker and wrote down the Morse code from the neighboring drilling platform on his arm. Their analysis revealed that strange occurrences were also happening next door. After holding on for 3 minutes, Lek finally collapsed to the ground. At this moment, the awakened Baz was amazed to find the wound on his hand slowly healing. When he looked at his eyes in a metal tray, disaster scenes flashed in his mind again. Terrified, Baz quickly put on a life jacket and went to the warehouse to find an escape route. Just as Baz finished packing and was ready to act, a gold nugget the size of a soybean suddenly fell out of his mouth. Rose collected samples of the ash from outside to study what the substance was. When she placed a drop of blood on the ash and observed it under a microscope, The ash homogenized the red blood cells. This made Rose realize that something was terribly wrong. Meanwhile, Lek, who had just been revived by the medical staff, decided to take a hot shower, but as Lek took off his shirt, black liquid inexplicably splashed out from the clothes. When he looked at his arm in confusion, he saw that the tattoo on it had been half corroded. Immediately, his fingers started to crack and bleed profusely. With black ash entering his body, Lek ultimately bled from all orifices and collapsed to the ground. At this moment, Baz was in the confinement room doing something strange. He kept drawing circles on the glass. When his teammate Alwyn came to check on him, Baz hurriedly shared his confusion with Alwyn. Baz said there was a voice in his head that kept wanting him to see something. He didn't know what it was. Just as Alwyn approached Baz to comfort him, an image of a dead body lying on an iron plate suddenly appeared in Baz's mind, scaring him so much that he ran outside. Alwyn was left standing there, puzzled, staring at the circles on the glass. In the operating room, a staff member accidentally found a gold nugget left behind by Baz, so he handed it over to Magnus for analysis.
The inorganic material in their bodies is being rejected.
Rose believed that Baz, like Lek, must have some sort of immune response. Without a conclusion, they were powerless to act. Meanwhile, Alwyn followed the direction Baz had fled to the deck of the drilling platform. He planned to escape with Baz before disaster struck, but Baz claimed that no one could escape from the disaster, that everyone would die. The image in Baz's mind matched the current scene exactly. Just as Alwyn reached out his right hand to guide Baz, Baz suddenly grabbed Alwyn by the neck, attempting to kill him. When the other teammates heard the cries for help and arrived at the scene, they saw Baz choking Alwyn, with seawater constantly gushing out of Alwyn's mouth. Baz took advantage of the neighboring crew's arrival by boat for rescue and vanished from his teammates' sight. By the time the medical staff arrived, Alwyn had already drowned. The man reported everything that had happened to Magnus. Baz seemed possessed by a demon, gaining special abilities. Meanwhile, other members on the drilling platform also began to mutate. To prevent more employees from being infected, Rose suggested conducting blood tests on everyone on the platform. If they found samples similar to Baz's, they could prepare in advance. Just as Rose was confidently ready to implement her plan, Magnus poured cold water on her enthusiasm. Because it was his orders that had led to their entrapment, the employees were now fragmented and wouldn't listen to him. At the same time, on the other side, medical staff member Fulmer was about to go to the lab to get the test results. When Fulmer opened the door, he found Baz inside, secretly looking through the test reports. Seeing someone discover him, Baz quickly asked Fulmer why they were researching him, stating that he was also a victim of the incident. As Baz searched for an opportunity to escape, he unexpectedly noticed the wound on Fulmer's hand. It turned out that Fulmer was also infected. Just as they were about to talk, Rose unexpectedly burst in. Seeing the dire situation, Fulmer quickly blocked Rose, then subtly hinted for Baz to take the blood samples and escape the lab. When Rose tried to pursue Baz, Fulmer claimed it was too dangerous and grabbed her. Thus, Baz successfully took his sample and reached the basement of the drilling platform. He then threw the blood into the sea. As the drilling platform's decontamination system activated, the virus began to silently spread throughout the interior. Realizing the severity of the situation, Magnus humbled himself and called an emergency meeting with all the employees. They currently face two major dangers. One is the infected Baz, who is still at large within the drilling rig. The other is the malfunctioning exhaust valve on the oil pipeline. If they couldn't reignite it quickly, there was a high risk of an explosion. So, the team split into two groups. Hutton led the Agile members to capture Baz, while the others went to reignite the vent valve. Meanwhile, Baz is spreading the virus inside the rig. With just a light touch of his hand on gasoline, spores covered the fuel in the next second. Biologist Rose analyzed the ash components and discovered something unexpected. All the world's oil comes from underground, and the spores on this fossil were identical to the ash under the microscope. This also means they may have drilled into oil containing the prehistoric virus. The last time this virus appeared was 300 million years ago, when 95% of life on Earth perished. Now that the virus had re-emerged, they had to save the world. Meanwhile, Hutton and his team continued searching for Baz inside the platform. Just as Garrow was about to discover Baz, he is unexpectedly drawn to the vegetation on the oil. It was his first time seeing plants grow on oil.
You coming?
As Garrow called his teammates to witness the phenomenon, Baz seized the opportunity to slip behind him. When Hutton and his team heard the shouts and came down, all they found was Garrow, who had been injured by Baz. Seeing he was not seriously hurt, Darrow pointed in the direction Baz had fled and urged Hutton to capture him while he followed closely behind. After they left, Darrow looked at the foreign substance in his hand. It turned out that Darrow had also been infected by Baz. Just as Hutton's team was about to catch Baz, a strong internal tremor caused them to lose their footing. It turned out that a damaged exhaust valve on the drilling rig had led to an internal power outage. Now, their most important task was to reignite the exhaust valve. Magnus, out of desperation, sought out Hutton again, begging him to lead his men to help. Moved by Magnus' plea, Hutton decided to help one last time. He instructed Fulmer to slowly approach the exhaust valve with a signal gun. Seeing that the range wasn't sufficient, Fulmer decided to unfasten his safety rope and take a risky approach toward the end. In a critical moment, Fulmer successfully fired the signal gun, reigniting the exhaust valve. But the next second, the blast wave from the flame hurled Fulmer several meters away. Fortunately, he did not fall into the deep sea. Magnus and his medical team eventually took Fulmer back to the operating room. Afterwards, Magnus went outside alone, clutching a mysterious stone in his hand. By now, vegetation had overrun the interior of the drilling rig. Baz searched the entire warehouse and finally found the internal controller. Now was his best chance for revenge, to bring the underwater virus to the surface. Baz and Darrow headed to the interior of the drilling rig. They manually opened the pressure valve. Just as Darrow fully turned the valve, Baz noticed the numbers on the computer screen were skyrocketing. If they reached the limit, an explosion was likely. Baz quickly stopped Darrow. Since this method wouldn't work, they had to solve it from the source underwater. Meanwhile, on the other side of the drilling rig, Magnus and his team were in the control room, searching for Baz's whereabouts. As they were at a loss, Baz suddenly appeared on the surveillance feed. He was in the internal machine room, attempting to bypass the safety control system to open the oil well valves. As Baz fiddled with the controls, everyone in the control room was on edge, because if Baz made a mistake, the well's pressure was enough to kill everyone there. So, Magnus and his team found the mechanic Easter and the computer expert Fulmer, deciding to use a robotic arm to manually close the underwater valve. As the robot descended to 3,000 meters below the sea, the scene before them left Magnus and his team stunned. The drilling rig's foundation had been completely overrun by prehistoric vegetation, leaving no place for the robot to land. Under such immense pressure, Easter skillfully connected the valve in one go. By leveraging inertia, they successfully shut off the main valve of the oil well. As they left the deep sea, the pressure values on the computer dropped sharply. Realizing the dire situation, Baz immediately pulled out the mainframe to stop the shutdown. Just when Baz and Darrow thought they were to blame, they had no idea that Magnus had orchestrated everything. After a moment's thought, Baz had a sudden realization and thought of the computer engineer Fulmer. Fulmer was the only one who could fix the computer. Meanwhile, after solving the underwater problem, Magnus and his team arrived at the control room and suddenly received good news. The fog surrounding the drilling rig had mysteriously disappeared, and they could now receive external signals.
This is OIM of Kinloch Bravo. Emergency rescue required.
After Magnus contacted the Marine Police at headquarters, they agreed on an evacuation plan for tonight. The excited crew members eagerly took out their phones to share the good news with their families. While the medic cat was video chatting with her daughter, she suddenly sensed something was wrong and asked her daughter to point the camera at the window. What came into view was a thick blanket of smog. It turned out that the fog surrounding them had moved to the mainland after leaving the sea. As Kat shouted for her daughter, the signal suddenly became erratic and disconnected. Meanwhile, the leader Magnus gathered all the crew to share the good news with everyone. Next, they just had to wait for the Coast Guard to rescue them. But before that, they needed to organize the evacuation order. Women and the injured would board first. Next were the working crew members. If there were any remaining spots, the medics and he would board last. While everyone agreed unanimously, Kat revealed her secret, claiming she had been pregnant for 3 months to gain priority. But upon hearing Kat's pregnancy news, Magnus immediately became serious. Because employees on the rig can't come to work offshore if they're pregnant, Kat has lied to everyone.
Self-endanger the entire crew, not least your baby. How could you be so selfish?
Under Magnus' accusations, Kat couldn't bear the blow and ran outside. As Kat went outside to vent her anger, she inadvertently noticed Fulmer walking straight into the interior of the drilling rig. As if under some kind of control, it turned out that when Fulmer was burned by the flames while igniting the exhaust valve during the day, he accidentally got infected with the virus. Baz had taken advantage of this to call Fulmer to the basement to help him. When Kat followed Fulmer's trail into the basement, the surrounding vegetation seemed to be attracted to the child in Kat's belly. Countless spores gathered in front of Kat and entered her body. Just as Kat stood there in a daze, her teammates pulled her out. By this time, the rescuers were also approaching the drilling rig with their ship. As everyone grabbed their luggage and prepared to escape, Magnus sat alone in his bedroom, crying. He seemed to know that it was all a trap. Meanwhile, Baz, who was in the basement, also sensed something was wrong. When Garrow asks Baz what it is, Baz says it's a scary guy. In order to escape alive, the crowd put their hopes on the lifeboat that had come to their rescue, but just as the crew finished packing and prepared to board the ship, survivors from the neighboring drilling rig came out from it.
Where's Rose Mason?
You're welcome, mate.
Without saying a word, one of the men asked a woman to take him to the control room of the drilling rig. Rose intended to have the man undergo a blood test, but he directly pulled out his work badge. Coke claimed that he was in a position of authority over everyone here, and that they had no right to stop him. Helpless, Rose had to follow orders and take Coke to the control room. As the people from the lifeboat all came ashore, Easter noticed his former friend Harish among them. After a brief conversation, Easter's expression turned incredulous. At this moment, Coke's first order after taking over the control panel was to restart the internal fire suppression system. He seemed to know that something was happening inside the drilling rig. Magnus wanted to refuse, but his authority was overridden. In the end, he could only dispatch Hutton and his assistant to restart the system inside the drilling rig. Meanwhile, Heather from HR, noticing Coke's unusual behavior, searched the employee list for Coke's name. The result showed that there was no such person in the system. This meant that the Coke in the control room was likely an impostor. After giving his orders, Coke seized the moment when no one was around to sneak into Magnus' office. Upon finding that the drawer didn't contain what he was looking for, Coke quickly shut it and pretended nothing had happened, engaging Magnus in a fake, friendly conversation. While Rose was studying the mysterious underwater circles, she arrived at a terrifying conclusion. The gaps between the 5 rings on her board represented 5 mass extinction events. The outermost ring represented their current century.
It wants to destroy us.
From Rose's analysis, Magnus deduced that the prehistoric virus intended to destroy the world to reset it, with the infected serving as the virus's helpers. As they discussed how to deal with the virus, Hutton and his assistant had already reached the interior of the drilling rig. The moment Hutton stepped on the vegetation, Baz sensed their presence. Baz then instructed Garrow to investigate while he and Fulmer continued repairing the computer. Following the tunnel's direction, Hutton successfully located the fire control system. The instant he opened the valve, Coke in the control room received an alert that the fire suppression system had been activated. After checking that no one was around, he switched on the fire suppression system without permission. Upon hearing the sound of the suppression pipes, Fulmer immediately sensed something was wrong. If they didn't leave quickly, they would suffocate. As Fulmer prepared to leave with Baz, Baz stopped him.
You got find Garrow and shut off. I'll stay here.
Compared to their lives, the prehistoric vegetation here was more important. Meanwhile, Hutton and his team, having activated the system, were preparing to leave the drilling rig's interior. Just as they turned around, the infected Garrow blocked their path. When Garrow grabbed Hutton by the collar and demanded to know what was going on, the oxygen-deprived Garrow coughed up blood onto Hutton's oxygen mask.
This is a alien! Come on, we gotta get out of here!
Ignoring the need to clean it, the group hurried outside. In the control room, Coke was monitoring their every move. As soon as Hutton and his team were outside, he planned to shut the door and kill Baz. As Hutton and his team reached the outside, they realized Dunlin was missing. Dunlin had seen that Garrow was out of oxygen and decided to help him. But when Dunlin looked at the pressure gauge in his hand and saw it was at 0, he quickly ran outside. Seeing that Hutton's team was still missing one person, Coke didn't hesitate and directly closed the door. Just as Dunlin was about to make it out, the door shut tight. In the end, Hutton watched helplessly as Dunlin was trapped inside the drilling rig. Meanwhile, the vegetation inside was withering at an alarming rate. Fulmer and Baz both collapsed, unable to hold on any longer. Learning that Coke had unilaterally closed the door, leading to their companion's death, Magnus and his team prepared to remove Coke from his position, but Coke claimed he was saving them. It turns out he knew about the prehistoric virus. 3 days ago, While overseeing drilling operations on his rig, Coke accidentally unearthed the prehistoric virus. Seeing the crew get infected, he summoned Harish to help kill the underwater virus. Just as Coke confidently believed victory was within reach, the pressure gauge suddenly spiked, causing the rig to explode. That's why Coke took the lifeboat to Magnus' rig to implement his plan anew. He had Harish delete his records beforehand, so no one would know it was his mistake that caused the virus to spread. Now, with the fog poised to spread to the mainland, they had to kill the virus here to prevent more residents from being infected. To rescue the infected trapped inside the drilling rig, Rose approached Hutton and his team, borrowing their oxygen tanks. She decided to go in alone to search for the infected. When Rose opened the door, she found Dunlin lying at the threshold. Seeing that Dunlin had no signs of life, Rose stood up and continued inside. She was met with prehistoric vegetation covering the entire machine room. Halfway through, Rose found Fulmer lying on the ground, barely alive. Noticing his faint pulse, Rose placed her oxygen mask on Fulmer's head, letting him take a few breaths. She then proceeded to turn off the internal fire suppression system. As Rose was preparing to pull Fulmer out, a strange scene unfolded. A mysterious spore emanated from the surrounding vegetation, and then Fulmer was awakened by a flash of lightning. As Rose helped Fulmer out, Baz was also awakened by the mysterious spores. Magnus and his team learned from Coke that the virus was approaching the mainland, so they planned to kill it before it could fully mature. But first, they had to rescue Baz, who was also an innocent victim. Upon learning that Fulmer had successfully escaped, they asked him to use his psychic connection to locate Baz. Fulmer placed his hand on the prehistoric vegetation. In the next second, countless spores emerged. Using his psychic connection, Fulmer successfully found Baz's location, but at this moment, Baz was unusually serious, as they sensed that a disaster was imminent and the virus had begun its final assault. Knowing that humans were trying to eradicate them, the virus triggered an underwater collapse, causing a tsunami. Having lived on Earth for hundreds of millions of years, the virus had a network spanning the entire seabed. The only way now was to find Baz and negotiate a collaboration with the virus, or the entire world would face extinction, so they decided to take the risk. Following Fulmer's guidance into the drilling rig to find Baz, through the dense prehistoric vegetation, they saw Baz communicating with the virus. It turned out they had misunderstood Baz from the beginning.
Shut me up.
Since being infected, Baz had been trying to negotiate with the virus because he knew its power. Just as Baz was about to open the oil well to release the virus, Magnus and his team stopped him. Now, the prehistoric virus was determined to reset the world. As Magnus and his team tried to salvage the situation, Headquarters rescue team arrived just in time. The terrified Coke was the first to rush to the helipad, trying to get on the helicopter, but Hutton grabbed Coke by the collar, ready to throw him into the deep sea. It was Coke who had closed the door, causing Dunlin's death, and Hutton wanted to avenge him. With Kat and her team's persuasion, Hutton decided to take Coke back to headquarters to face legal consequences. As the crew on the drilling rig prepared to leave by helicopter, negotiations between Magnus' team and the virus ultimately failed. Seeing the impending underwater collapse and tsunami, Magnus quickly led everyone outside. As they reached the exit, Baz remained. Drawn by the prehistoric vegetation, Baz chose to stay and perish with the vegetation. If they're not protected, it'll all start again. In the end, Magnus gave Baz one last piece of advice before leading Rose and the others onto the escape helicopter. As the helicopter took off, a powerful tsunami flattened the drilling rig. Baz ultimately sacrificed his life to the mysterious virus. Just when they thought they'd be spared by leaving the surface, they were unaware that an even more powerful tsunami was heading towards the mainland. The Rig Season 1 ends here.